Good morning. Welcome back to the Askew Sunday School Bible class. This is the way we're doing it since we have to social distance. My name is Dorothy Thompson, and I lead the discussion at First Baptist Church's Askew Bible class. I want to mention that we have other Bible classes as well at First Baptist. This is not the only one. Dr. Duma Harshaw is the pastor of First Baptist, and Brother Sam Green is the superintendent of Sunday School. Today our lesson comes from Esther, and it's a really interesting lesson. I think it has implications for our time. It comes from the 7th chapter of Esther, the 1st through the 10th verses, and I would encourage you to go back and read the whole book. It's not a really big book, and so I think you will find it interesting. I will try to give you background lesson after I have read the scripture. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the king. And the king said again unto Esther on the 2nd day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, and my people to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for handmen and handswomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Xerxes discovered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine. And Haman had fallen upon the bed whereupon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the home? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. The title of the lesson is An Executed Scoundrel. And frankly, I think Haman was much more than a scoundrel. Sometimes we say people who have bad intentions, people who tend to just want to seek mischief all the time, are scoundrels. But Haman was someone who had murder in his heart. The background of this lesson for this Sunday is that Xerxes was the king of Persia. And at that time, the Hebrews or the Israelites were in bondage or in slavery in Persia at this time. And the king at that time had all the pleasure he wanted. He was extremely rich. He was over all the governors of the provinces, and he could have just about anything he wanted. He gave a big party, a big banquet, they call it in the Bible, for his compatriots, so to speak. And though it appears that he had not invited his queen, Vashti, and it was a second thought, he sent for her to come, and she didn't come. Now, there's no mention in the Bible that he asked why she didn't come, or that she said she was sick, but it is presumed by some that she intentionally did not want to come to the banquet, and she didn't come. And so King Xerxes was very angry, because in that day, women were supposed to do whatever a man asked them to. Even the men who were the servants, their wives had to do whatever it was a man asked them to do. So then the king was extremely angry and said that he would not allow Vashti in his presence anymore. Well, it also seems that at some later date he did not feel as happy about that decision. But his advisor suggested to him that real punishment for her would be for him to choose another king. At that time, there was a devout Jewish human being in the province, in the area, and his name was Mordecai. Mordecai had reared his niece, because her parents had perished, both of them. And this niece of his, Esther, was an orphan, and he had adopted her and raised her as his own. And he had raised a very fine, intelligent, heartful human being who cared about others and was particularly liked by everybody. So that when the king sent out his edict that he was looking for a wife, a person in her particular place groomed her to go before the king and to possibly be selected. And she was selected. So that Esther became the queen, Xerxes' queen, Xerxes' favorite human being. There was a rule that you could not go before the king unless he granted you permission, even his wife. In the meantime, the king had selected someone under him very high in his government, a man named Haman. Haman is the scoundrel in this story. Haman was so full of himself that he expected everybody to bow down to him, whether they were the the people from Persia, the people from other areas, the Jewish people who were in exile in the kingdom. They were all expected to bow before him. Well, Mordecai was a devout human being. His devotion was to God, and he refused to bow down. Haman was greatly insulted. For him, that meant that Mordecai didn't think much of him. So he goes to the king and asks permission to not only persecute, but slaughter these strange people, he called them, who were in the kingdom at that time. He said they were strange because they wanted to keep their own customs. They wanted to be with their own people. They wanted to speak their own language. And he just did not believe that the king should suffer that. So much did he want permission to get rid of these people that he actually said that he would pay the king to be able to do it. Well, the king, not knowing who he was talking to, not knowing who he was talking about, granted permission. And word got back to Mordecai that Haman was on his way to gather all of the people, all of the Jewish people, all of the Israelites, and slaughter them. So Mordecai went to his niece, and he said, your people, Haman has a decree out to kill your people. And we need you to go before the king and stop this before this gets out of hand. Well, Esther said to her uncle, she said, but, what can I do? I can't go to the king unless he requests to see me. And so Mordecai says to her something that we all must consider. Perhaps this is why you're here. Perhaps you have this favor for this very reason. So Esther went away and she thought about it. And she really knew that she didn't have any choice, because not only did she need to save her people, she was a Jew and she had to save herself. So Esther goes back to her uncle Mordecai and says, I want you to get the people together and ask them to fast and pray for 3 days. And I will fast and pray for those same 3 days, and then I will go into the king. And so there was one condition that the king allowed, and that was that someone had permission to approach him, and he had a golden scepter, and if he turned that scepter toward them, that meant that she could speak. Well, Esther chose to have a banquet. As a matter of fact, she had a 2-day banquet, and our lesson is a result of that 2nd-day banquet. She invited Haman to come to the banquet, and she approached the king in Haman's presence and said, as we just read in our lesson, I want you to give me permission to take possession of my people so that they will not be slaughtered. And of course the king said, well, who has this in mind? And she said, your servant, your chosen appointee, Haman. Well, Haman was shocked. He did not know that Esther knew of his plot. He did not know that these were Esther's people. And when the king found out that Haman had tricked him into doing this, he walks out of the room. Haman then is distraught. He begs Queen Esther for his life. And in begging her, she is on one of those beautiful couches that we've seen the queens lie on. There's a name for them, but I can't think of it right now. Anyway, he begs her for his life. Haman lays on the couch on top of Esther, and the king comes back in. The king says, not only has he put me in this position, but would he dare to lie upon my top wife at this time? There's another part in this story that is also very interesting, and that is that Haman's wife and others had advised him to build a large, tall gallows upon which Mordecai should be hung. Well, when the king heard about this, he said that Haman should be hung on that gallows. And as a result of his behavior, of his desire to kill others, of his belief that he was more powerful and better, he was hung on the gallows that he had built for somebody else. This story for me has a lot of implications for now. There's sexism in it. For me, the king nor any other person has the right to, just because a woman or a person is a woman, bid them come, and they don't have the right to say no. In addition, the Jews were in exile as slaves. In my mind, nobody has the right to make a slave of another person. I don't believe that anybody has the right even to treat somebody with disrespect because they're in their employ. I believe we all here with our purpose. We do find ourselves in different stations in life, but not because some human being has the right to control us, but rather that God has us there for a purpose. And so that piece of this story is very interesting to me, that instead of Esther backing up and throwing her hands up, she says and listens to her uncle, perhaps I am in this place for this reason. Perhaps I should go to the king. And she further says, and if I go to the king and he doesn't grant my request, if I die, I will die. And so we have the example of a woman who recognized that the place that she found herself in was a place where she was supposed to do not her will, but God's will. My suspicion is that often we, you and I, find ourselves on a job, at a meeting, maybe in a parking lot, somewhere where we see that somebody needs somebody to stand up for them. And perhaps it frightens us to think that maybe we could be harmed if we stand up. But I'd like to encourage us to follow the example of Esther and say, perhaps for this reason I am in this place. Perhaps when everybody else thinks that this particular human being is terrible, let's say you're a school teacher and some child is in trouble, and everybody thinks that child is the worst person in the world, all the adults around them. Perhaps we are there, if we see something different, to say, no, he's not a lost cause. She's not a lost cause. I'll help her. I will stand up for her. Perhaps we have an experience like I had once, where I was in a parking lot, and I heard a little baby crying. And I looked into the car, and there was this little 3 or 4 year old boy with his almost newborn baby in the car. The baby was crying and wiggling, and she actually had almost turned her carrier over, and the little boy was looking with his eyes very big, straight ahead. He didn't know what to do. Stranger that I was, I took this little child by the hand and I said, we're going to go in the store and we're going to find your mom. And I picked this baby up and this little boy, and we went into the grocery store. Now, why did I do that? I think I was at the right place at the right time, but there's another reason. I remember the time when my daughter was sick, and I had to stop in the drugstore and get her some medicine. And she was sleeping, and I did not want to take her in the store and wake her up. And so I left her and my 4-year-old son in the car and asked him, take care of your sister, a 4-year-old and a baby. No. And so when I saw this same thing happen to me, that I had later regretted it. When I went back to the car and I saw my son's eyes, I said, oh, I made a mistake. If I can make a mistake, so did this mother. So I went into the store with the baby. By this time, the baby's not crying, and I said to the little boy, show me your mom. And he did, and I went up to her, and I said, he was so scared. The baby was about to fall out of the carrier. I heard her crying. I said, I decided to step in and bring you your baby. I said, I know what it's like to have 2 children, 2 young children, and I wanted to do this for you. So in my own, and it worked out fine. She wasn't angry with me. She didn't call the police. She didn't curse me out and say, how dare you interfere in my children's lives. It worked out fine. I also gave her my name and my card, and I said, anytime you need some help with your children, here's my card. And so what I'm saying, that all of us, I think, find ourselves in a place where we have to stand up for other people. This is my last point about this story. Haman not only was angry with these people because he said they were not, or this particular man who was the leader of these people would not bow down to him. There's another part of what he didn't like about the people. They were from another place. They were keeping their customs. They were enjoying their language. We might want to think about the immigrants that come to our country, and how we think of them as wanting to keep their own customs and wanting to speak their own language while they learn English, so we can all count together. The Bible has a story, this story, that says we are bigger than that. We can be better than that. And so I am hoping that you will see this story the way it has been revealed to me, and that perhaps today or another day, bless your heart, you'll stand up for somebody and save a nation's life as well as your own, your soul and your life. I've enjoyed talking with you. I'm looking forward to when this social distancing is over, but I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.